Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart, and this time we're talking about the release timing for Splatoon 3. When exactly is this game going to be coming out? We know it's slated for 2022, but when in 2022? Could it be early 2022, late 2022, or somewhere in between? That's what we're speculating on today. Now before we jump into things, let me first very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen, you can check that all out, it is linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe. So when it comes to speculating on the release timing for Splatoon 3, there's a few different factors to take into consideration. The first one I would say was when it was shown off and how it was shown off. So Splatoon 3 was officially announced at the beginning of this year in a February Nintendo Direct. And when it was shown off as the final big reveal, and the trailer I would say was fairly extensive at that point in the year. So for so early on in the year to show something to that extent for something that's not even coming out until sometime next year, there was a lot there. They showed off a hub area, they showed off multiplayer, they showed off even what appeared to be single player and actual character customization, presumably the beginning of the game. So with all those components in mind, it seems like they're pretty far along with the game, not to mention, at least from my perspective, from a visual sort of point of view, it does look like they're pretty far along as well. I'm not saying it's finalized or even close to it, but it seems like they had a lot going by that point already. So taking all that into account, there was a lot of speculation that maybe the game is actually really far along. And I thought maybe the game could come out sometime between March 2022 and summer 2022. That's been the window, that's been the sort of the expectation. But then some rumors started coming out suggesting that maybe this game could be coming out by the end of the fiscal year, meaning by March 2022. So that would be the earliest of this sort of window of speculation in terms of when it could come out. So I started to sort of buy into that, maybe thinking, okay, this game could maybe come out by March 2022. We don't know what's coming out for March 2022, at least by this point in the speculation. So people were thinking maybe this could happen. But then E3 came around and Nintendo didn't show off Splatoon 3 at all. So then the debate sort of came back up again. A lot of people have been speculating maybe Breath of the Wild 2 comes out for March 2022. And they did show off a trailer at E3 2022, but there was no release timing, there was no title drop, it was just a fairly short trailer, about a minute and a half. That's pretty much it. So it seemed like Breath of the Wild 2 is not likely for an early year release either. It is slated for 2022, but if you look at the history of Zelda releases, excluding Breath of the Wild, which was delayed to that point, they usually come out towards the end of the year. So my speculation, my expectation, is that Breath of the Wild 2 releases at the end of 2022. But still, even after E3, some rumors persisted suggesting that maybe Splatoon 3 comes out by March 2022. And, you know, I sort of bought into that a little bit, maybe thinking, yeah, that's a possibility. And if that is to be the case, we would likely get an actual release date for it by the September Nintendo Direct. And when we got the September Nintendo Direct, sure enough, they did show off Splatoon 3. It was a big component to the Direct, but they did not give us any sort of specified release timing. It's still just 2022. So now that that's happened, now that we've gone that Direct, I am skeptical of a March release for Splatoon 3, especially considering that Triangle Strategy is coming out March 4th. So there's already a published Nintendo game coming out at that point in the year. So while there could technically be more than one published Nintendo game coming out in the same month, it decreases the likelihood of that, especially considering that usually in the first half of the year, there are less releases than the second half of the year. So if there's a time to see two different games coming out in the same month, it's probably going to be in the second half, not the first half. I'm not saying it can't happen. For example, this February, we saw the release for 3D World plus Bowser's Fury and Bravely Default 2, two published Nintendo titles. So it can happen, even around the early part of the year, but I'm just saying, with Triangle Strategy already slated for March 4th, and Splatoon 3 being shown off during this September Direct, and still us not knowing about when it's coming out, that doesn't bode well for a March 2022 release. Not to mention, Advance Wars Reboot Camp just got delayed beyond December, beyond 2021. and we're seeing an estimated release date on the eShop for April 8th, 2022. If that date holds, it might be weird to maybe expect another big release like Splatoon 3 dead smack in the middle of Triangle Strategy and Advance Wars. Could happen, but I'm just saying it's becoming increasingly less likely in my opinion. Now, to provide a bit of a counter argument, my good friend Dumo put out a video about Splatoon 3's release timing not too long ago. I'll put a link in the description below, and he talks about some really good points, so I definitely recommend checking out that video after this one. But one thing that's brought up that he noticed during the direct was that they didn't have any sort of like disclaimer saying that this is early footage in the trailer. What does that suggest? Does that suggest that the game is pretty much done and that the footage we're seeing is pretty much finalized? Hard to say for sure. I feel like, that's something they should have had in there, but maybe they decided not to put it in there. Maybe from a graphical perspective, the game is pretty much complete and they're just working out other things. Maybe they're simply holding the game off until they want it to come out during a certain particular time. Hard to say for sure, but it certainly does lead one to believe that maybe the game is pretty far along, which is why they are not putting that disclaimer. It's just something to consider, but either way, even if the game is pretty much done, if you just look at where Nintendo is sort of putting their games for next year, it still seems pretty unlikely, especially considering that we just got a big feature for Splatoon 3 and they didn't really tell us when it's coming out. So that just doesn't bode well for a March release in my opinion. So what about beyond March? What about April through December? Can it come out sometime during then, or is the game gonna get delayed? I don't think the game is getting delayed. It was slated for 2022 back at the beginning of this year. We got another update on it, a fairly big update on it during the September Direct. I absolutely believe that Splatoon 3 is going to be one of Nintendo's big marquee titles for 2022, so I'm not worried about it getting delayed. It really just comes down to pinpointing when it's coming out within 2022. So I feel like, we've pretty much come to a conclusion that it's probably not coming out in March. So then, when else could it be coming? Could it come maybe April or May? Well, if we look at the history of Splatoon releases, Splatoon 1, back on the Wii U, came out in May. Splatoon 2, which released on the Switch during the launch year, came out in July, and then its DLC, the Octo expansion, came out June 2018. So we're seeing a bit of a interesting sort of grouping here. Splatoon tends to come out towards the end of spring or sometime during summer. Basically that period of time where kids are getting out of school, so they have more time to play Splatoon. So I definitely think that's suggestive of the window we should maybe be expecting here. If that's how all the Splatoon releases have been, why should we expect this time around to be any different? Especially if Breath of the Wild 2 is looking like the big holiday release for 2022, and we're getting Pokemon Legends Arceus at the beginning of 2022, it may be the case that Nintendo wants to have these three huge titles sort of fairly split apart from each other, to be spread out, because all three of these titles have the potential to be 10+ million sellers. Pokemon games can sell above 20 million. Splatoon games sell above 10 million. Breath of the Wild sold above 20 million as well. So they probably want these to be spread out because they're all three really huge releases, likely the three highest selling games will be coming out on the Nintendo Switch next year. So Legends Arceus is January, Breath of the Wild 2 maybe October or November, which leaves Splatoon 3 falling around the window of the other Splatoon releases we've seen in the past. So could we maybe see Splatoon 3 come out as early as this May? I think that's definitely a possibility, but I'm gonna say no. And the reason I'm saying no is because Advance Wars has that estimated release for the beginning of April, but also Kirby and the Forgotten Land, that epic new, fairly ambitious 3D Kirby game, is slated for spring 2022. So that puts it around the window of April or May already. So that's seeming like a pretty prominent title, so I'm thinking they're going to space that out just a little bit. Now, conceivably, Kirby could come out maybe late April, and Splatoon 3 could come out late May, and it could work out in that way. But I'm just gonna say that because of that, it's a little bit less likely, and I'm gonna predict that Splatoon 3 comes out at the earliest this June, just in time for E3. And if it doesn't come out in June in time for E3, it'll come out just a month after, in July, just like Splatoon 2. So that's pretty much what I boiled it down to. Splatoon 3 will be coming out in either June or July of 2022, in the summer, when everyone's come out of school and they are available to play Splatoon 3, and it'll definitely be the kind of game that will be fully featured at E3, and it's gonna perform really well, I think. Anyway, that's where I'm standing right now. Splatoon 3 comes out sometime summer of 2022, with the test fire coming out a few months beforehand. But what do you guys think? Where do you guys stand on the potential release date for Splatoon 3? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways, everyone, this is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.